All right, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin, Daf Nun Aleph, starting at a fresh Mishnah. And at the conclusion today, just to give you what to look forward to, we have one of our famous Ya'al Kigams, one of the famous times in Shas, one of only 6 times when we paskin like Abaye over Rava. So we'll start that sugya toward the bottom of Nun Aleph Amid Aleph. We'll wrap it up at the top of Nun Beis Amid Aleph, about a quarter of the way down to the 2 dots, where you can see there that it says V'hilchasa ke'Abaye, V'hilchasa kavased Abaye b'Ya'al Kigam. But let's first get there. The Mishnah writes, "Mekadesh isha ubita," a man who tries to propose to a mother, to a woman and her daughter, o isha ve'achosa ke'achas, or to 2 sisters, but he does so in one transaction. Hare atem mekudashos li. At the same time, so the Mishnah says, "Einan mekudashos aten." Stop it. You're fired. It's true, actually, though. You're right. Okay. Umaisa, we'll see soon that this Mishnah is not so pashut, but Umaisa, there's a story. Bechamesh nashim, with 5 women. Uvahen shte achayos. And of the 5 women, 2 of the women were sisters. They were sisters, and the other 3 were not related to one another or to those 2 sisters. And v'liket adam echad kalkala shal te'enim. A man did a collection of te'enim shalahen haisa, and it was theirs. These words require some commentary, but not now. V'shal shvius haisa, turns out that it was actually perush shal shvius. V'amar, he said, Hare kulchem mikudashos li b'kalkala zu. This is not a very good idea. Do not try this at home. He proposed to 5 women with a basket of shvius. V'kibla achas men al yedei kulan. One of them is like, all right, this sounds like a reasonable idea, which clearly means it's not a reasonable idea. What's the halacha? V'amru chachamim ein achayos mekudashos. So it seems to be that the achayos, that the sisters are not mekudashos. We're going to be analyzing this in a moment. Says the Gemara, 7 lines from the bottom, second line of the wide lines on Nun Amud Beis. How do we know that this Kiddushin of 2 sisters, or a mother and a daughter, when they're done in the same moment, how do we know that that Kiddushin is a 0? Says the Gemara, Amar Rami Bar Chamad, Amar Kravi, Shalach Oselo Sikach Litzror. We know that a woman and her sister cannot be taken to become tsaros to one another. Tsaros is the famous lashon from Maseches Yevamos, but tzara is the kowai. They dislike each other. They're married to the same person. There's a tension there. So whenever we have a scenario of a Torah Amra, Bisha'a Shenasu Tzaros Zulazu, whenever you have 2 sisters that become tzaros to one another, Lo Yehelo Likuchim Afilu Ba'achas man, there will be no purchasing. There will be no kinyanim, not for either of them. And even though in theory you could have married only one of them, but when you tried to marry 2, you married 0, because that's a drasha and chumash that you're not allowed. Amar le Rava Yihachi, Rava pushes back and says, I'm not sure I understand how you understand the psukim. Why? Hainu dechsiv, the pasuk says, that the people who do this are going to be chayav kares. But how can you be chayav kares if you never got married to either of them? Kares is a very severe punishment, and it applies in this scenario where one woman is married and the man sleeps with his sister. But says the Gemara, Kiddushin lo tafsiba, kares mimachayev. It can't. It has to be that there's some. If you're learning from there, then you have a problem, because the psukim seem to say that there is some level of kiddushin. So therefore, Rava disagrees seemingly with Rami Bar Chama, and 3 lines from the bottom, Rava says, "Hello Amar Rava, excuse me, Kra b'zeh achar zeh." The pasuk is talking about marrying one sister after another. I married Rachel, and then I tried to marry Leah. By Rachel, the first Kiddushin was Chal, because it was a regular 1-woman marriage. When I tried to marry the second woman, that's when the Isser Kares snuck in. Yeah, absolutely. And that makes perfect sense. Umas Nisan, and our Mishnah adds, whenever we have a scenario that whenever you can't do 2 things in sequence, then by definition, afilu bavas achas nami lo. Then had it been done at the same time, it also won't work. So these are our layers according to Rava. Layer number 1 is the psukim and chumash. What does that mean? The psukim and chumash say that I married Rachel. If I then try to marry Leah, that second Kiddushin isn't chal. If I sleep with Leah, then I'm chayiv kares for sleeping with the sister of my wife. That's not allowed. And the Mishnah is like Rava. And the Mishnah is adding in that when it's done ke'achas, that any time we have bezeh harzeh that it's not allowed, then pashut that be'achas it's not allowed. That's what's going on in our Mishnah, and that is the line that we're going to analyze at length right now. 2 lines from the bottom end of the line. Gufa. Omar Rabba says, Kol she'enu bezeh harzeh. Rabba wanted to make an extension from the pasuk. What he wanted to say is that if 2 things can't happen in sequence, right? If I can't marry Leah after I marry Rachel, if I marry Rachel on January 1st and I try to marry Leah on January 2nd, and the marriage to Leah doesn't work, then by definition, if I tried to marry both of them at the same time, Rabba says, then it will not work. Afilu b'vas achas eino. And the Gemara poses 1, 2, 3 questions on this shita of Rabba. Let us analyze. Esve Abaye. Abaye asks Akasha on Rabba. Top of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. These pages are deceiving. They're really full-length pages. They're just shaped differently. And the next page is shaped differently and not short. So these are bigger blot. We will get done at some point tonight. I don't know when. Hamar bebe meiser. Let's say a person breaks the general rules of meiser. And we're talking here about meiser peiros. So the halacha is, as Rashi says, take a look at Rashi. Hamafresh echad mechamisha. If you separate 1/5, which is 20%, shemona arbaim lechulin b'tzad umadar chamishes l'meiser. We have a scenario where you're taking more than 10%. So peirosa misukanim. Let's say that I have 50 pieces of fruit, and I give 10 pieces of meiser. So that's too much. Meiser would have been 5. I gave 10. So the halacha is peiros misukanim. The 40 fruits are fine, but the meiseros are mekulkalin. The meiser is mekulkal because you're not supposed to give more than meiser in these settings. You're not supposed to. But ve'amai, why would you say that that's the case? After all, we should have applied Rabba's rule. Neima kol she'eno bezeh harzeh afilu b'vas achas eno. If you're not allowed to give 20%, so what if I gave 10% and 10%? You're not allowed to do that. So why doesn't Rabba's rule kick in over here? If it's true, if Rabba's right that bezeh harzeh doesn't work, and then b'vas achas it also shouldn't work, why over here b'vas achas did it work? We said that the peiros were misukanim. The first 40 fruits are fine. They shouldn't be fine according to Rabba. So says the Gemara, because Amar Le, shiny meiser. Meiser is different. The isei lechatzayin, because there's a unique din that exists only by the world of meiser, where there are halfsies. What does this mean? The Amar tiskadesh palga dechitza. If a person says, I want half of this stock to be meiser, halacha l'maisa, kidsha, sanctified to be meiser. So because you can take half of a fruit, half of a stock, half of a whatever, and turn it into meiser, so that's a chiddush by the world of meiser, and therefore we can't apply Rabbah. It's a good kasha, but it's not a kasha that sticks against Rabbah, because Rabbah's principle can't apply to cases that are unique. And the case of meiser has a chiddush in it, which is the isei lechatzayin. So let's try asking from something that doesn't have chatzayin. V'harei meiser behema deleika lechatzayin. Every year I take my animals and I create a bottleneck in the pen so that all the animals can only fit one at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The 10th one I paint. That's my din of meiser by meiser behema. So there, says the Gemara, you said the case of meiser by peiros had a din of chatzayin. Okay, 5 lines down. Meiser behema deleka lechatzayin. Now I have a case where I don't have the concern about chatzayin. But leka bezeh harzeh, you're also not allowed to do one after the other. You can't take the 10th animal and then paint the 11th animal. Can't do that. B'mezid, you can't do that. So then, Amar Rava, Yatsu, that the Gemara says this would be a great raya for us that Rabba's din should work. But what does Rabba say, or Rava, I should say? Yatsu shnayim be'asiri. Let's say 2 animals sneak into the bottleneck in the 10th slot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2 animals that are small or whatever, they sneak into the 10th spot. The Quran Asiri, and verbally, you called those as the 10th. So then, and then also Asiri, ve'achadasar me'uravim zebazeh. And now you have 10 and you have 11. They're all mixed up with one another. So the halacha is that they're all treated as meiser. So why would that work? If b'mezid I tried to make the 11th into a meiser behema would not work, then according to Rabbah, doing it b'vas achas also shouldn't have worked. Kasha and Rabbah. If Rabbah is right, that's something that can't be done, bezeh harzeh, then for sure it can't be done b'vas achas. That's a kasha. Says the Gemara, you're a great kasha, beautiful, lamdas, great job. But there's also a chiddush by the world of Meiser Behema. And says the Gemara 8 lines down, 2 lines into the Y line, shiny Meiser Behema. To Isei B'tos, that we have a unique chiddush dekadin by the world of Meiser Behema, that when there's a tos, that we still count as Meiser. That's not true by other things. It's true over here. What's the case? It's not. The Mishnah writes, this is a Mishnah in Maseches Bechoros and in Maseches Erevin. It's not. Karalat Shi Asiri. If you call the 9th out of 10 animals the 10th, Ule Asiri to Shi, and the actual 10th one, you called the 9th, Ule Achad Asar Asiri, and you called the 11th the 10th, Shloshtan Mikudashin. So therefore, we see that there's a chiddush by the world of Meiser Behema. By the world of Meiser Behema, we allow for tos. When there's a tos, all of them are mikudashin. It can't be done b'mesit, but if it's done b'tos, that's a chiddush dekadin. And whenever there's a chiddush, we cannot learn from there. And therefore, no longer a kasha on Rabbah. As of now, Rabbah's din still stands. That whenever we see that we can't do two things in sequence, such as marrying one sister after the next, we therefore would say we cannot then do those 2 things at the same time. Hare Toda. Let's ask a kasha and Rabbah from the world of Toda. We know that when the Korban Toda was brought, that there were 40 lechamim, 40 pieces of bread that were brought. 10 of them were matzah, and 30 of them were regular chametz. Probably smelled amazing. No? You have the smell of blood, raw carcasses, korbanos, the ktores. Huh?
And fresh baked bread.
Fresh baked bread. It's a fresh fest. It'd be amazing. So says the Gemara, what about Toda? Toda doesn't have the problems, doesn't have the chidushim of the previous cases. The leisa b'tos, you can't make a tos of 40 extra loaves. That doesn't work. But leisa nami b'zachar, that's also usher to say, here are the 40 loaves, and then in the next sentence and say, and here are another 40 loaves. No. So we should apply Rabbah's rule over here. Yet, that doesn't seem to be Chizkiya's opinion, because v'itmar, we have a statement in the Amoraim, a memra, Toda shenishchata al shmonim chalos. If the Korban Toda was shechted, and what was provided was way more than the necessary 40, but rather 80, what does Chizkiya say? Chizkiya Amar, Kat Shila Arbaim Mitoch Shmonim. He says 40 of the 80 count. But why? That should not work. According to Rabbah, if Bazeh Achar Zeh they won't work, then Bevas Achas it shouldn't work either. So in your case of Toda Shenishchata on Shmonim Chalos, and Chizkiya says that it works, Chizkiya is breaking the rule of Rabbah, and Chizkiya he's not a lightweight. He's another Amora. But how can Rabbah say this? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan is the dissenting opinion against Chizkiya. He's not where our kasha comes from. Lo kachila arba'im mitoch shmonim. He agrees with Rabbah, but nevertheless, we seem to have a kasha on the shita of Rabbah from the world of Challah. Says the Gemara, not a good argument. A third of the way down, give or take, on Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, Labit Marala. Don't we have a statement about this already? A statement about this din of Toda. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Hakol Modim, everybody agrees. If somebody says, I have 80 loaves of bread, 40 of them are mukdash to be part of the Korban Toda, everyone agrees, kachi, that counts. Lo yiktashu ba'arbaim elaim kain kachi shmonim. What if a person says, the 40 are nothing unless 80 count too? Right? So then for sure that's not going to work, lo kachi. So then, where's the machlokes of Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan? Lo nechlaku ela b'stam. Here we're talking about a case where just stam, nothing. He didn't make any special stipulations or articulations. Mar savar le'achrayis kamechavi. And the guy brought 80, but didn't say boo about the fact that he brought 80 loaves of bread. The Kohanim are looking at this guy. They're like, what is going on here? Like, why does he have 80? But he didn't say anything. So then we have a machlokes as to how we look at those 80. Mar Savar, according to Chizkiya, who accepted the first 40, what must he have been thinking about the extra 40? Says the Gemara, Savar le'achrayis kamechabe. He was just achrayis. He's just covering his bases. If the first 40 fall into a puddle of mud along the way, so then no problem. We have an extra 40. It's backup. Boy Scouts, be prepared. So the Chizkiya maybe was just saying those extra 40 were for nothing in particular. Mashein came halfway down to Mar Savar lekorban gadol klamechabe. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that lo kachila arba'im mitoch shmonim, that there's nothing going on here. All 80 of these are not challah. So then the Gemara says that's because he assumed that they were for just making the korban bigger than it was supposed to be, that you're trying to make it into 80 lobes when you're not allowed to. So therefore, the Gemara basically tried to shut down Rabba's opinion. Rabba's opinion stands the test of time. And therefore, if we were poskim, which we're not, we should assume based on this Gemara that whenever we see in the Torah that one thing cannot be done after another, it also means they can't be done at the same time. If they can't be done b'zeh achar zeh, then it can't be done b'vas achas, with the exceptions of meiser, with the exception of, what was the second, of regular meiser pairs, of meiser behema, and potentially korban toda, depending on how you hold. As a little bit of a side note in this sugya, Rava lama le lishnuye kiraba. Why is Rava and Rabba, why are they interacting toward the bottom of the page on Nun Amud Beis where we started? We saw that they had different approaches here, and Rava invoked the shita of Rabba. Remember, Rava had a difficult time with our Mishnah. He said it has to be that the psukim are talking about b'zeh achar zeh, and Rabba is talking about b'vas achas. So why did he have to invoke Rabba's name? Remember, Rava was the next generation of Rabba. Says the Gemara, Tepuk le, perhaps we should say by the sisters, forget about Rabba. We have another reason why it should be the case that they should not be married. Tepuk le, Kiddushin she'ein mesurin lebia ninu. That we're dealing with a case scenario of Kiddushin she'ein mesurin lebia. If you have a Kiddushin where bia is not a possible aftermath of the Kiddushin, then that's not Kiddushin. Well, that's a machlokas, as we're soon going to see. That's the kuf in Ya'al Kigam. We're gonna get there. So it's the kuf, is that right? Just make sure. Yeah, that's the kuf in Ya'al Kigam. So we'll see soon that we paskin like Rabba, but the Gemara says that Rava was concerned about this, that why wouldn't you say that it's also the concern about Kiddushin she'ein mesurin lebia? Says the Gemara, l'devar of the Rami bar Chama Kama. Rava was speaking on behalf of Rami bar Chama. He wasn't talking about his own shitas. He was just trying to make things smooth for Rami bar Chama, because Rami bar Chama had quoted a pasuk that didn't make any sense. Rami bar Chama had used the pasuk of Isha lachosa lo sikach litzror, and a drasha from there that b'vas achas is not allowed. That didn't work, because then there was no way to create kares. If the pasuk's talking about b'vas achas, then we have no scenario of kares. That's why Rava came in and explained on behalf of Rami bar Chama, but it wasn't his own shita. Now we're going to dig into this machlokes of Kiddushin she'ein mesurin lebia itmar, a little bit more than halfway down, 2/3 of the way down on Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. The Gemara says itmar Kiddushin she'ein mesurin lebia. If we have a marriage and the marriage is not able to lead to bia, Abaye Omar, that even though there's no bia, that's okay. Havu Kiddushin, that's considered a marriage, and because they can't have tash mishamita, fine, they have to get divorced. I understand, but the mechanics of marriage were successful, and they're halachically married. Masha'en kain Rava Omar lo hava Kiddushin. Rava was of the opinion that they are not married. If the marriage itself, the mechanics of the marriage, cannot lead to a mutter bia, done. Conversation's short, conversation's over, you're not married. Zero. Omar Rava, who says that this isn't even a marriage at all, he says, Bar Ahina Asber Ali, Bar Ahina explained to me as follows. When the pasuk says, Ki yikach ish isha uve Allah, look at the pasuk itself. This is such a good raya, a classical text proof from a pasuk in Chumash. The pasuk says, where is this pasuk in Dvarim Chav Dalet? Ki yikach ish isha, when a man takes a wife, uve Allah, and he is intimate with her. Super simple. Kiddushin mesurin lebia, have a Kiddushin. Kiddushin she'ein mesurin lebia, lo have a Kiddushin. Hey, you could teach this to a second grader. The pasuk is so clear. It's obvious, according to Rava, who learned it from, Bar Ahina, that only Kiddushin that can be followed by a bia is considered to be actual Kiddushin. We're going to have a whole host of questions here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions, and then we'll finish the day with paskening like Abaye. But let's dig into each of the 6 questions. It's not 7 lines or so from the bottom. Hamakadesh isha uvita, a man who marries a woman and her daughter, isha ve'achosa ke'achas, or a woman and her sister at the same time. This is our Mishnah. Einon mikudashos, they're not married. What's the diuk from here? Ha'achas me'isha uvita, me'isha ve'achosa mikudashos. The Mishnah seems to frame it that you're not married to either of them, but perhaps as a diuk we could say that you're married to one of them. That's implied from our Mishnah. And if in fact that's true, that's a beautiful raya for Abaye, because Abaye said that if there is Kiddushin, it's Kiddushin. Okay, it's not a good Kiddushin, it's not wonderful, it's not great, you need to get divorced, whatever. But Lamaisa is still Kiddushin. V'amai, says the Gemara. We should have said Kiddushin she'ein v'surin l'bia ninhu. This should be tiyuf to the Rava. Rava wanted to say that it's not even a marriage. But there's a diuk from our Mishnah that if a man says, I'd like to marry you and your daughter, and the Gemara said, the Mishnah says, Eina mekudeshes, Eina mekudashos, plural. But Lamaisa, there's a diuk that perhaps she's married to one of them. And that's a raya for Abaye against Rava. The Gemara says, Amar lach Rava, that's really adorable that you're bringing a question for me from our Mishnah. But ulatamech, according to you, a Masefa, you should look at the end of that Mishnah, because the end of that Mishnah is going to be a thorn in your side, Abaye. Why? There's a story with 5 women, of whom 2 of which were sisters. So this guy took a basket of dates that belonged to them, and it was of Shvius. That the sisters are not married. And what's implied from here is that of the 5 women, the sisters were the ones who were not married, but the 3 randoms, those were the ones who were married. So now Rava, in his pushback to Abaye, analyzes what our Mishnah really means. Hechidami, what's going on with our Mishnah? If really the accurate, correct language of our Mishnah is the language of kulchem, I want to marry all 5 of you. So then kani at v'chamorhu, ve'at chamor lo kana. We're dealing with a case of purchasing you and your donkey. Donkeys have no kinyan. And therefore, this is a catchphrase, a colloquialism. And if you look in Rashi at the bottom of the page, he doesn't give a mari makom, but he does explain a little bit 2 lines from the bottom. Toward the end of the line, kani at v'chamorhu no sein matana lenolad ulubar shbemeimo she'eno kona klum. Gam hanolad eno konan. If you make a conditional kinyan that both of you need to accept, nobody should get it. The ubar is not bala olam. So if you say to the baby who's in utero and the baby who's not in utero, the 1-year-old, I have a gift for you. It belongs to nobody. So says the Gemara at the bottom of the page, if in fact the language of our Mishnah really was kulchem, the whole thing is miraf sinigra. Nothing. You can't say to 5 women, I'd like to marry you. Because if you can't marry the 2 sisters, by definition, you can't marry the 3 nachrios. So therefore, that doesn't work. Ella, says Rava, pushing back on Abaye, top of Nun Aleph on the base. We're going to be going about a quarter of the way down to Nun Beis Nun Aleph Elulav. It must be that our Mishnah's language is wrong. It rather should be the language of the Amar Lahu Achas Mikem. I'd like to marry just one of you, not kulchem, just one of you. V'ktani ein achayos mekudashos. And there we see that the sisters are not married. So Rava has now shown Abaye that there's no Kiddushin even by sisters. We have to change the language of the Mishnah, Rava says, change it from kulchem to achas mikem. But in doing so, we now have a kasha back on Abaye from our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, the Rava kasha resha, Abaye kasha seifa taka. Our Mishnah is very difficult. So when we learn Mishnayos, we learn them like, okay, whatever. No, these bedakus halashon, the Resha does not work for Rava, and the Seifa does not work for Abaye. So now Abaye and Rava are both on the hook. They got to figure out how to read our Mishnah. You have to remember that this is a couple 100 years after the Mishnayos were codified, and they still didn't know how to read the Mishnayos. It's so foreign to us. We have Kahati, we have English, they had no idea what Pshat in the Mishnah was. And we think we get it, It's like so cute. So the Gemara says, Nun Aleph Amud Beis, 3 lines down, Abaye mitarz the time. Abaye has to rework our Mishnah, and Rava as well mitarz the time. Let's go through both shitas. Abaye, let's remember what Abaye holds. Abaye says that there is Kiddushin, even though the Kiddushin doesn't lead to Bia. Let's remember that's our center of the bullseye that we have to hold on to. So Abaye mitarz the time, 4 lines down. Hamekadesh isho bita o isha v'achosa ke'achas einen mekudashos. That's a quote from our Mishnah, that if a man tries to marry a father and a daughter or 2 sisters, they're not married. What's the diuk from there? But one of those two women will be married. Perfect match for Abaye. That Kiddushin, which does not lead to Bia, is still Kiddushin. And V'im Amar, this is in addition to our Mishnah. This doesn't exist in our Mishnah. Abaye was hard at work to change things. Here, look at what he did. V'im Amar Haruya Labia Tiskadeshli Enim Hekudeshes. He put in words that couldn't possibly match his shita better. What does he say? Haruya Labia, that one who is fit to me for Bia will be married to me, and that's nobody, because you're talking to two sisters, and you can't marry both sisters. So therefore, Enim Hekudashos. What about the story at the end of the Mishnah? We said of the 5 women, 2 of whom were sisters. A guy picked up a basket of dates. And he said, he parroted the same language from the Reisha and put it in the Seifa too. And he says that those of you who are fitting to marry me will be married. By rewiring the Mishnah to say exactly what Abaye needed it to say. It's perfect. It's not surprising, but it's perfect. So Abaye is good, no problem at all. And on the first of the long lines, Rava mitarts the time as well. Rava says as follows: Mekadesh achas meisha ubita. If you marry at once a mother and a daughter. Achos or achas meisha ve'achosa. Nasa k'misha kidesh isha uvita o isha ve'achosa k'achas enin mekudashos. Even if you marry one of them, you're not allowed to marry any of them. There is no Kiddushin when it comes to marrying a mother and a daughter. There is no Kiddushin when it comes to marrying 2 sisters. So far, so good, because Rava held that there was no Kiddushin in a case where where Bia was not allowed after Kiddushin. How does he change the story? The story in our Mishnah of the 5 women, 2 of whom are sisters. This guy picks up a basket of dates. Listen to the language change. All of you, the all of you now doesn't refer to all 5. The all of you refers to the randoms, the 3 women who are not related to anybody. And problem solved. Rava is able to maintain his shita here too by changing and editing the Mishnah. So, no matter how we cut it, the Mishnah that we started with today on the bottom of Nun Amud Beis is not the Mishnah that we concluded with, because neither Abaye or Rava agree to that Mishnah. That Mishnah is Soser itself from Reisha to Seifa, doesn't work. So, if we were to pick up, I didn't check, but if you pick up a Kahati, he'd have to write in there that this Mishnah is not actually the conclusion. It's rather like Abaye or like Rava, and we'll soon see that it's like Abaye. That was question 1, asked and answered. We thought we had a kasha on Rava from the Seifa. Turns out we had a kasha on everybody, and everybody answered it. Let's move to question 2, a third of the way down on Nun Aleph Amud Beis. Toshma, Hamakadesh is Bito Stam, a man who married off one of his daughters. Ein habogros bichlal. The older girls are not included. Once you're of a certain age, a father cannot marry you off. What is implied from here is that haktanos bichlal, but a father still has a responsibility to marry off his younger daughters. Ve'amai, why would you say that? Kiddushin she'ein misurin lebiyaninhu v'tiyuvta derava. L'chora, this seems to be a tiyuvta derava, because we don't know which of the youngest girls he was trying to marry off. Maybe he has triplets. I did a bris today for twins. They both happened to one boy, one girl. So it didn't really work. But let's say that it was, by the way, this was a real anomaly. This family had 2 sets of twins naturally, a year and a half apart. Unbelievable. I'm like, that's lacha. I told them something that I've told you before, that the only difference between someone who has twins and triplets is that when you have twins, you think you can handle it. And when you have triplets, you know you can't.
Correct.
Then they offered me a cream cheese with corned beef sandwich. A great capstone to the afternoon.
Inside the house.
Pasha. I don't think the sukkah was the biggest problem.
Yeah.
It was one of those days where you say a bore priagafen and the room is completely silent. It's a Raya Brewer that a Kodesh Baruch Hu runs the world, because according to our own logic, there's no future. Saying, the guy knows nothing. They live in the middle of nowhere. They're connected to nobody and nothing.
But yet they found you, so you see there's hope.
See, there's hope.
So what are you?
Huh?
This kid
Yeah.
got started off right.
Is it
8
kosher
years old.
bris?
Yeah, is he 8 years old?
He's 8 days
8
old.
years old, he got started off right.
Yep. His name is Yeshaya, because they asked me what name is closest to Shaya. So I said Yeshaya, but they gave a secular English name as Shaya, whatever.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't dig. Okay, but Baruch Hashem, there has to be there's a pint of a yid in there. You just got to make sure they have kosher bris. Baruch Hashem. Amar Lach Rava. Rava says this kasha about the bogros, the older sisters and the younger sisters, is not a kasha at all. It doesn't mean that Kiddushin she'ein mesur lebia is going to be a kasha against the Rava, because as follows: Amar Lach Rava. What would Rava say? We're only dealing with a case where there's only one older sister and one younger sister, and therefore, because there's only one older and one younger, we're certainly not going to. The father's not going to marry off the older one. He has no achrayas to marry off the older one. The younger one is his achrayas, so he's going to marry off the ketana. Bogros katani says, Gemara, you can't say that. Amish, the Brisa says bogros, that there's older sisters in the plural. Says the Gemara, my bogros to Alma. Just saying they have a bunch of daughters, but there's only one ketana. And because there's only one ketana, we know who's possibly getting married here. Yihachi says the Gemara, my lememra. That should then be obvious that he's going to marry off the ketana. Because as mentioned, his chiyuv is to marry off the ketana, not to marry off the gdola. Says the Gemara, where the older daughter was the shavise shliach. The older daughter appointed him, the father, as a shliach. I have a kasha in this Gemara. We learned that children don't appoint their parents as shliach, but it's a mechutza. Okay, but lemaisa, but nobody's saying she's a polite daughter. But if in fact she did the shlichus, it actually is shlichus. It still works. It's just not nice. Let's keep it up, eh? The shlichus could work as long as he's makabel to be the shliach. He has no chiyuv to help her anymore in a specific halacha. Why is that less mechutza for a daughter?
That was talking about the son.
I know, but I thought it was out kibbut avaim that a child.
Yeah, the difference being a father, this is the code itself. You're sitting on the couch, I should go out. The daughter has no business going out looking for a husband. That's the father's responsibility. I wonder if it's different.
Very good, David.
I wonder.
I have no idea.
No idea either.
Okay, I have no idea. I just thought it was a din, and I hear your chakira clear.
It is, but it's only chutzpah under certain circumstances, I suppose.
Wow. All right, we have to go back and look at that other sugya and see our makopmas there. Very good, thank you. It's halfway done.
Clear, but I wonder if culturally so.
Could be, but even here, she's a bogeris. She's not even in the limelight right now.
He can't even come on his behalf. He really is a full-fledged shliach. It's true.
He's a real shliach.
It's true.
I don't know.
Meaning, at younger ages, he can be makabel on her behalf.
Without shlichus.
He, a bogeris, I think,
she's on her own. We'll see soon. We'll see soon. She's on her own.
Yeah.
Says the Gemara, Mahu de Tema, you might have thought, Ki Mekabel Kiddushe, that when he is accepting Kiddushin, Adaita Didaka Mekabel, for the older daughter for whom he was made a Shliach, Kamash Malan, that that's not what he would do. The Lo Shavik Inish Midi, the Isli Hana Mine, that the husband, I should say the father of these two daughters, is not going to ignore a scenario where he has what to gain. What does that mean? It means that with his younger daughter, he gets to keep the Kiddushin money. But the older daughter, he doesn't. So he has a motivator to marry off his younger daughter. It's pretty narcissistic, if you ask me. I'm just saying, if I had an older daughter, the pasuk in Chumash by Lavan, Lochein bim komenu, l'seisat seira lifnei bechira. But nevertheless, halacha l'maisa, and maybe with a person's motivations, a father would not put preference over the older daughter instead of the younger daughter, because with the younger daughter, he gets the money of the Kiddushin. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. In regards to the older daughter, she's an old maid already. She's 16 and she's ready to get married, but she hasn't found her suitor yet. She says to her father, you be my shliach, you keep the Kiddushin. I just want to get married. So perhaps that's the case. The Gemara says, afilu hachi. Even if that's true, that the father was able to get Kiddushin for both the older daughter and the younger daughter, he's still going to service the younger daughter. Because because a father who has an opportunity to do a mitzvah that is incumbent upon him will not ignore one that isn't. Namely, his obligation to his younger daughter is more than the obligation to his older daughter, who's no longer in his halachic sights because she's a bogeres. She's a bas chiyuv already on her own. Unbelievable. All right, so that was question 2. Tried, that didn't work either. So let's ask our third question halfway down on an aleph at the end of the line, Toshma. Okay, Mishi yeshlo shtei kite banos mishtei nashim. A man got married twice, or a man is married to 2 people, and he has daughters from both marriages. 2 daughters from 2 marriages. So he married Rachel and had 2 daughters, and then after that, he married Leah and had 2 daughters. The 2 daughters of Leah are both younger than the 2 daughters of Rachel. The Omar kidashti es biti hagdola. I said the phrase that I was going to marry off my oldest daughter. But the problem is, ve'eni yodea im gedola shebigdolos. I don't know if I meant Rachel's oldest, v'im gedola shebigtanos, or Leah's oldest, v'im ktanos shebigdolos, or the youngest of Rachel's, who's older than both of Leah's kids. Shehigdola mina gedola shebigtanos. So let's say this is the case. There's 4 girls. The older 3 girls are all potential candidates for gedola, and we don't know what to do. So the Gemara says, Kulan asuros chutz miktana shebektanos tivi Reb Meir. Reb Meir says that the youngest of the 4 daughters is considered to be stuck. She's married, even though she probably didn't want to be married. So it says the Gemara, that's a kasha then, because we see over here that there is marriage, there is Kiddushin, even if it's not nimsar levia. The Gemara responds 2/3 of the way down. That case is actually not what we think it is. That case is Kisha Hukru Ulavisof Nisarvu. He taka knew on day 1 which daughter he was talking about, but he forgot. It's not the best executive functioning skills, but he forgot. And de Kanami, the Gemara says, I could bring you a raya brura that this is in fact the case. The Katani, Eini Yodea, I don't know. The Lo Katani, Eini Yodua, it is not known. I don't know. I forgot. It's not that it is unknown. I just don't remember. Yachi says the Gemara, that case is pashut. If you have a case scenario like that, then of course it's going to be the case that the youngest daughter is the only one who's eligible. Says the Gemara, people won't speak in these terms and end up in cases of suffix, speaking broadly about a gedola. You'll say daughter X is going to get married to your son. Be specific. So we're going to maybe assume that people don't talk this way. Says the Gemara, Kamash Malan, the machis inish nafshe l'sveka. People do talk this way and enter themselves into very complicated scenarios all the time. Could you imagine, like, if you're like at a place where there's like a bunch of dayanim sitting at, the rabbi's table at a wedding, and a father goes over to another father. One of my daughters will marry one of your sons, and all the dayanim are like, oh my gosh, like, what are we going to do? Can't getting for everybody. It's a disaster. We'll see cases that are worse than that. So that case also, we have asked and answered. We tried asking again on Rava, no dice. Question number 4, 12 lines or so from the bottom of the page. Tashma, Ishakidesh achas mishtei achayos. A man who married one of 2 sisters. Ve'eno yodea is a kiddush. No saying get lazu, ve'get lazu. So identical twins can't tell them apart. Whatever, you just harab mikudeshesli. One of them took them, and they're both playing the game. Nobody knows who's who. So we see that the Kiddushin is chal. How do we see the Kiddushin is chal? Because they need a get. So that's a kasha and Rava. Rava said that in such a case, it should be the case that nobody's married. So then we should have no get. But over here, it seems that Abai is right. The Gemara says, and here too, this case is an abnormal case. He knew, the husband knew, the guy proposed to one. He's not such a mutzlach. So he doesn't know which woman he proposed to. They look very similar. So it says the Gemara, Dekanami, I can prove this as well, because here too, if you look one line up, it says Ve'eno Yodea. So Dekanami, Dekatani, Eno Yodea, Velokatani, Eno Yodua. So this case also is different. Says the Gemara, Yachi, if it's true that he knew and just doesn't remember, Ma'ila Memra, that's pasha that he'd have to give a get in both of those cases. He knew at the moment, that's a chalos, that's a real Kiddushin, pasha that he's going to have to divorce both women if he doesn't know who's who. Why don't we ask the women? That's not brought up in the Gemara. Ask them.
Somebody's got to do it somewhere.
As I said yesterday, and as we've said 100 times, halacha is always taught at the edge of reality, because that makes everything within reality, much more understandable, because there are iterations of cases like this that can happen. Let's say you propose to one of these women, and one of them dies, and the other one has amnesia. Okay, so now can that other woman ever get married? Don't know. So that's this Gemara. So it says the Gemara that in such a case, why do we need that case? That should be Pasha. Seifa itzrichale. We need it for the Seifa. All right, let's get into some Yevamos. The Gemara says, Meis velo ach echad. If a man dies and he had a brother, so choletz l'shtehen. So then there has to be chalitza for two of them. Hayilo shnayim. If you had two brothers, echad choletz ve'echad miyabim, then there has to be one chalitza and one yibum. Im kadmo v'kinso ein motziano samiyadam. And if that brother married before chalitza, which he should not have done, then then we don't make them get divorced. And dafka michlatz v'hadar yivumi. When there are two brothers, we should do chalitza first and yibum later. Aval yivume v'hadar michlatz is a bad idea. Lo tekapaga be'achos zikukaso. Because in such a case, when there are two women, and we're not sure who's the avama and who is not the avama, so if you do yibum on a woman thinking she's your yavama and you're wrong, then the other woman is still zakuka liyibum. She's stuck, and that's not good either. So therefore, that's not something that we should do. So asked and answered again. Question number 5. Tashma. Shnayim shekitchu shtei achayos. 2 men married 2 sisters. 2 random men married 2 sisters. Ze eno yodea ezo kiddush. V'ze eno yodea ezo kiddush. 2 givaldik talmidei chachamim. They have no idea what they did. Ze nos ein shnei gittin, v'ze nos ein shnei gittin. Everybody has to write a get to both women. So Chaim writes a get to the 2 sisters Rachel and Leah, and Ruvain writes a get to the 2 sisters Rachel and Leah. And again, Kasha and Rava, because we see over here that there are gittin, which means that there's Kiddushin, even though the Kiddushin wasn't imsar lebia. So that's a Kasha and Rava. So the Gemara responds, Hachanami, this case is also not a raya shehukul of sofnis arvu. Over here, says the Gemara, here too, he knew what was going on. The husbands knew initially when they proposed, they knew who was who. And de kanami, de katani, that this Brisa also said, Eino yodea v'lo katani ein yadu ashma mina, that case is an abnormal case. Their original Kiddushin was chal, because hukru, in the beginning, they knew who was who. So if they're marrying the twin sisters, Chaim and Ruvain, look nothing alike, they're not related to one another, from different families. They married twin sisters, and they're like, was I with Sprinza? I can't remember. So that maybe they have amnesia. Something not normal is happening. But the Gemara says, if your ukimta of the Brisa is that they actually were hukru in the beginning, that they knew who they married, why'd you write the Brisa? If it's hukru, then obviously they're going to both need to write gittin to both women. Can't sleep with either of them, can't be married to either of them. Says the Gemara, Seifa itzrichale. We need it for the Seifa. What's the Seifa? Meso lazeach v'lazeach. If they died, both men died. So the 2 twin sisters, they're alive. Both of their husbands died, and each of the husbands had a brother. Ze choletz l'shteihen. Ze choletz l'shteihen. Each woman has to do chalitza to all men. So Chaim has a brother, Ruvain has a brother, and Rachel and Leah have to do chalitza 4 times, 2 each. 4 each. Each have to do chalitza on everybody. Now, what if lezeh echad v'lezeh shnayim? Let's say Chaim had 1 brother, and Ruvain had 2 brothers. A slight change in the case. Turning to the top of Nun Beis and Aleph, says the Gemara, ha'echad choletz l'shtein. 1 woman should do chalitza to 2 men. V'hashnayim echad of the 2 men, shnayim. There's 2 of them. Echad choletz ve'echad miyabim. For one of them we do chalitza, and for one of them we do yibum. And im kadmu v'kinsu. And if there wasn't a marriage to one of them, ein motziano samiyadam, but that's actually not the right thing to do. Davka michlatz v'hadar yivum. We should do chalitza first. Aval yivum v'hadar michlatz should not be done. Lo, why? De kapaga b'yavam l'shuk. But she can't marry a random person because she's a kuka liyava. She has zika to somebody. So you can't just go marry somebody. That's not right. The original husbands are dead, and you just go out and marry a random guy. That's not allowed. So therefore, this again asked and answered on Rava, and here is going to be the final makeh b'patish question, which will lead us to our conclusion. Sorry for the longer shiur, just a longer blot, but we're almost done. We're on Nun Beis Marala, 4 lines down. Tashma Datani Tivyumi. Tivyumi taught us. Lazech Hamisha Banim. Oh my gosh. One guy had 5 sons. For Lazech Hamisha Banos. Oh my gosh. Okay, the permutations of the math. Who could possibly be married to who? V'amar achas mibenosayach mikudashes le'echad mibanai. Literally the worst possible phraseology ever with this number of children was that language. Kol achas ve'achas tzricha chamisha gittin. There's 25 gittin are written on the spot. All of them need divorced. Okay. Meis echad mehem. If one of the brothers die, then the problem is that we don't know who's married to who, but now we have a yibum situation where each of the remaining women, 5 women with a potential zika to any of 4 men. It's not good. Kolachas v'achas tzricha arba gittin v'chalitza me'echad mehem. So now we need 4 gittin and we need 4 chalitzas.
Well, 4 chalitzas total, 20 gittin.
4 chalitzas per person. One woman does 4 chalitzas. And each woman,
one chalitza.
No, she has to do chalitza for all the.
And only one of the brothers has.
Oh, you're right.
Because once it's done.
Once the chalitza is done,
they're for sure brothers. One died.
You're right. Absolutely right. Correct. Thank you. That's even what the words say. Okay, so kol achas v'achas tzricha arba gittin. So the gittin we can't get around because that's marriage. V'chalitza, her right, because they're all brothers. So therefore, the zika that she has is severed with this chalitza. And v'chitema, if you want to say in this case, hachanami kishahukru l'sofnis arvu, that's definitely not true. In all of the previous cases when we said that there was an initial knowledge and then he forgot, but here the language was ha'achas mi benosayich le'echad mi bonektani. Tiyufta de Rava tiyufta. He is rejected. Rava is rejected from this brisa, and therefore, what do we see? And the kuf is where we started a long time ago, which is Kiddushin HaMesurin Labia is Havu Kiddushin. That's how we paskin like Abaye. We paskin that in these marriages that are not able to lead to Bia, there still is considered to be a marriage. And if that's true, that when these scenarios do come up, they're not stam that they just walk away from one another just because there can't be Bia. If there can't be Bia, but there was Kiddushin, Lamaisa, they're married, and therefore they need to get to continue. We'll pick up right here, Mir Hashem, tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.